voted in May to refer to Columbus Day as Indigenous Peoples Day.
They're doing great. We were able to hang out Saturday and Sunday.
This is
So had a good time.
WCPT Willow Springs.
Yes, ma'am.
Streaming worldwide at WCPT820.com.
Yes, ma'am.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. Now, your WCPT 820 Chicago traffic update.
Always, yes, ma'am. I'll do it.
On the Tri-State Tollway northbound, traffic is packed solid from I-57 to Kedzie. There's a crash there blocking 2 left lanes. We're seeing delays on the outbound raw end from around...
Oh, I also want to remind you, I think there is a contest today. Let me check. Yeah, did Devin do one with you? Let me check real quick.
Can you email it to me quickly?
Never mind, it's for Joan. It's not. Never mind.
Delays from 35th Street into the Burn Circle. Inbound Stevenson, traffic is heavy Harlem to Pulaski. It's 29 minutes from the Veterans Memorial Tollway to Lakeshore Drive. Up on 22 minutes. Inbound Bishop Ford, traffic is sluggish from around Stony Island to King Drive. That's traffic. I'm Jim Telemonte.
Remember when you get to work to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app.
It never stops.
Show,
Never stops, but I'm glad you're with us
on
today.
Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Always glad to be with you.
Okay. We are
Amy
under
Goodman
2
reports on
minutes.
the news stories rarely covered by the corporate media. Democracy Now!
Democratic House members Cori Bush and Bonnie Watson Coleman introduced a bill Tuesday that would decriminalize all drug possession and put in place a, quote, health-centered approach. Missouri Congressmember Bush said, quote, it's time to put wellness and compassion ahead of trauma and punishment.
Democracy Now! Weeknights at 8 on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Okay.
If you feel America is facing more dangers than
here
ever,
About a minute.
Okay.
things are falling apart, it seems, every day. That's what you need. More of the unexpected, especially food shortages. When people panic, grocery stores run out of food fast.
Okay.
Would you
All
survive
right.
without food for days, weeks, even months? The smart folks are buying emergency food now. Take a moment to shop MyPatriotSupply.com. We're America's leader in preparedness. With over a dozen years' experience, My Patriot Supply has earned over 40,000 4-star and 5-star reviews. Our delicious, calorie-rich food.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Renee.
And lasts in storage up to 25 years.
Andre,
So it's there
Linda,
when you need
Carol. So you got
Go to
it there bright and early. Big Bree,
MyPatriotSupply.com. Order a kit or two. and we'll
Jewel,
ship
Joyce.
quickly
It's
and
always a joy to be with
discreetly
you.
to your
Shirley from
door.
beautiful
Don't
Philadelphia.
wait for something
Michael,
bad to happen
holiness,
again.
love it.
Rather, be more
Jarvis,
self-reliant and
Daryl.
prepared.
Carol,
Go to
everybody, please like and share, like and
MyPatriotSupply.com.
share, like and share. We're going to be
MyPatriotSupply.com.
talking about ranked choice voting
You're listening
today.
to WCPT
Coming up.
820,
And
because facts matter.
we're looking at pride today.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. Yes, we can change the world. We can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love. It's not too late. Gotta save the children. We can't wait. Let's change the world. I am breathing.
Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. It is Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021. WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Got a little feedback, Dylan. So let's get that, and then we are on our way. Call me at 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. If you text me there, which you may do, GWC and Lawyers gives you the opportunity to do just that. I want you to meet my morning stars. Hey, just see all of them coming together. Linear Bob from out there in San Jose. I'm sending you much love. And Deborah and Renee and everybody. The Santita Jackson and Friends page, also on WCPT 820, that page. And you can catch me on Santita Jackson IG on Instagram. And we're streaming live on the YouTube channel of the Santita Jackson Show. The Santita Jackson Shows. Please like and subscribe there, and like and share this show. Create some watch parties. Got a lot to talk about today. Ranked choice voting. It's a new approach. It's not necessarily a new approach, but it certainly is in the United States. And so we're going to be talking about that because that's happening today in New York City. Some people say that it could be a more democratic approach to voting, where you get a chance to have your number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth and fifth choices, your first, second, third, fourth, and fifth choices, and you fill in your ballot that way. And it you got a lot of people running there this time. And so if anyone doesn't meet the 50% threshold, you're going to have a runoff. The first, second, third, fourth, fifth. They're going to continue. It's a weeding out process. Do you agree with it? Dave Daly and Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary are going to be talking with us about that at the bottom of the hour. Then we're going to have Phil Wilson. He is a pioneer in the LGBTQ plus space for Black people. He founded the Black AIDS Institute when we were still treating people who had AIDS as pariahs, and he wanted to shine a light on what was happening, in particular in the Black community. He did that, and he indeed is an historical figure. He's a trustee of AMFAR, and a very dear friend of mine. He's going to be talking to us today about Black people and their relationship to pride. The Black LGBTQ plus community. We at this station are celebrating Pride Month, and we're having a particular emphasis because this is Pride Week at WCPT. I want to know what you think about that, and I wanted to shine a light in particular on the communities that we don't see typically in Pride, and that is the Black and Brown community. So that is why Phil Wilson will be here, and of course we'll have John Nichols from The Nation talking about how these wealthy corporations are funding these anti-democratic movements. They're the ones who are behind Joe Manchin and the push against voting rights. Yeah, we got to talk about that, everybody. Lots and lots and lots to talk about today. And in the coming days, the NCAA, oh, there's just so much, so much. They're breaking up that plantation system over there. So I'm glad to see that. Before we get to the good news with Reverend Stephen Thurston II, I want to give you some of these headlines. I guess let's get right to it, everybody. After weeks of warnings about the growing dangers of the coronavirus variant, the Delta variant, this may be responsible for a 6-fold increase in hospitalizations in one Missouri city alone. A hospital CEO in Springfield, Missouri said most of the patients there are unvaccinated and appear to have not observed basic pandemic precautions. Health experts worry more local spikes like this one could be on the horizon. And I have to tell you, most of my friends who are vaccinated are unmasked. And they tell me they don't need to wear masks because they're fully shot up. I'm like, really? Okay, NCAA. The Supreme Court unanimously handed down a huge ruling yesterday saying student athletes can receive education-related payments. This is huge, everybody. The case could reshape college sports by allowing more money from this billion-dollar industry to go to the players. In a concurring opinion, Justice Brett Kavanaugh said the NCAA is essentially acting, quote, above the law and how it treats athletes and forbidding them from making money off their college fame. The ruling is the first time in decades the Supreme Court has considered this issue, and it is an enormous win for a class of students who said that they are being exploited. Indeed, the head coaches make millions upon millions of dollars. This is a billion-dollar industry. Indeed, this is the moneymaker for most of the big colleges in the country. And the workers, the students, can't make a dime. Remember, college sports, particularly college sports, the football team, all these teams that bring the people, it's the first job that you have. If you don't do well at that job, you lose your scholarship. Remember that, everybody. Lawmakers are set to resume tense negotiations over voting rights today, infrastructure and police reform during an important week for President Biden's legislative goals. He met privately yesterday with Senators Sinema and Manchin, who are crucial players, the moderate Democrats, in the president's push for his $4 trillion economic agenda. Today, the Senate is set to vote on whether to advance a sweeping elections reform bill. Without Republican support, Democrats are posed for a stinging defeat. Everybody is looking at the mayor's race in New York, where they will be using ranked choice to determine who the winner will be. Who will meet the 50% threshold? People don't expect anyone to do that. Who will finish number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's going to make a big difference. Dave Daly's going to explain that to us in just a few minutes. Interestingly, over 30,000 U.S. veterans of post 9/11 wars have killed themselves since 2011. This is according to new research released yesterday. It shows that the post 9/11 wars launched by the U.S. military since 2000 have resulted in over 30,000 suicides by active duty American soldiers and veterans, over 4 times the number killed in combat operations. This is from the Brown University Costs of War Project, established in 2010 to account for the loss of lives and taxpayer dollars spent on U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. 30,177 veterans and service members have killed themselves over the last nearly 2 decades, everybody, compared with 7,057 members of the military who were killed in combat. It's something we've got to look at, and we will on the Santita Jackson Show. Here's something really, really momentous. Carl Nassib, who is with the Las Vegas Raiders, he becomes the first active NFL player in history to come out as gay on Monday. He said, "What's up, people?" He posted on Instagram. "I just wanted to take a quick moment to say I'm gay. I've been meaning to do this for a while now, but finally feel comfortable getting it off my chest. I'm a pretty private person, so I hope you guys know that I'm not doing this for attention. I just think that representation and visibility are so important." The UN is warning of the worst cascade of human rights setbacks in our lifetimes. That's what the UN chief said on Monday. He called for a concerted effort to recover from the worst global deterioration of human rights she has seen, highlighting the situation in China, Russia, and Ethiopia, among others. Everybody, the pandemic had cost the typical American woman nearly $600,000 in lifetime income. And that's just the average. What about Black women, Hispanic women? Much, 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 much more. Reverend Stephen Thurston, Pastor Stephen Thurston, teaching pastor of... Oh, it's just there's so much going on. I could just go on and on and on with all these stories that I find. My goodness. Oh, we need some good news today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Always good to be with you and this amazing audience.
Oh, they are wonderful, aren't they? The Santita Jackson Show Morning Stars. We love them. We love them. What's on your mind today?
I want to talk about disagreeing without disrespecting. With all of the topics that you bring up, there are always people that have so many different angles. And I think that we need to grow as a people to a place where we can disagree with one another without disrespecting the other person. Outside of my responsibilities as preacher, pastor, I run a consulting firm. And in consulting with individuals, I often remind them that if everyone always agrees with everything you say, everything you do, and everything you present, then somebody is lying. Healthy, confident, emotionally intelligent individuals have to become comfortable with pushback from people. Environments that are healthy, they always allow for and support divergent opinions and points of view. And when an individual is healthy and confident, they'll actually appreciate others who will at times disagree with them. Here's why. Healthy individuals understand that disagreement can lead to better ideas, problems being solved in new and innovative ways, and relationships being strengthened, and the promotion of personal growth among groups of individuals. But the sad news is that not all environments exhibit this level of health, and not all individuals exhibit this level of confidence. So somebody's asking, what do you say when you disagree with someone who may have more power than you? Or how should you conduct yourself if you're in a staff meeting? When you see that the team is headed down the wrong path, but you don't want to be seen as the negative Nancy or the pessimistic Paul. Listen, I get it. I understand. I've been in those situations myself. And it's natural for us to want to shy away from or avoid situations that might harm our career, our status, or change the perception of us in the eyes of people that are around us. I totally connect with that. The anxiety that we feel when we want to speak up, but at the same time we're unsure of doing so, it lies in the fact that we foresee only negative implications by expressing our thoughts and our opinions. Listen, Somebody's listening in today, and you've been feeling this. You've been in this space, and you've been playing it safe by shutting up. But listen, going along to get along isn't always the right thing to do. So allow me to shed a little light on how you can disagree with someone without being disrespectful. Number one, 5 quick things. Be realistic about the risk. Most of us overplay the risk involved in speaking up by imagining what could go wrong. I want you to consider the risk of not speaking up versus the consequences of taking some action. Number 2, determine if the conversation should be a public one or a private one. Discernment and emotional intelligence will lead you to know what you should say online versus what you should take offline in the conversation. This also gives you some time to think things through, gather the needed and necessary information so that you can have an intelligent conversation. Number 3, and most importantly for me, identify a shared goal. You're more likely to be heard if you're able to connect your disagreement to a higher purpose. You want to be sure to contextualize your perspective so you're viewed as a collaborative colleague who's trying to advance a shared goal. Number 4, ask permission to disagree. I like to present a different perspective, if that's okay. It's a great way to frame and to start off your conversation. Framing your commentary with the introduction that I've just given gives maybe a powerful person that you're engaged with a psychological safety net and sense of control. It just makes the conversation go so much smoother. 5th and finally, validate the original point. You don't want this to turn into a fight about if you understand their point or not. Restate their perspective better than they actually did, then venture into the points that you want to make. At the end of the day, a thoughtful, respectful approach will always trump an aggressive, demanding approach. Don't be afraid to open your mouth. Learn to be a good communicator who can express themselves convincingly with evidence and rationale as you build relationships. And hopefully, Santita, you'll turn some adversaries into allies.
Do you think that we would have, many of us are surprised that many people are not going back into the workforce. I mean, they're quitting their jobs at a record rate. And now people
Yes.
are beginning to say, hey, you know what? I'm not going back to this job because you don't pay me enough. You don't value me. You don't respect me
Yes.
enough. Do you think that if we listened more, as you're telling us to do, and we're able to have these difficult conversations, do you think that we'd see something different?
I think so. Yes. People want to feel valued. It kind of ties into like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we're seeing that, I'm seeing that as a sociologist play out in this space of the work environment and how things are changing post-COVID. And people don't, as you said, they don't feel heard. They don't feel valued. It's difficult to have the conversations. Many people aren't skilled in conversation skills, de-escalation skills, negotiation skills, listening skills. And so we find people just kind of giving up the ghost in the sense, I'm out, I quit, putting on my running shoes, not running to another place and space. And oftentimes that's done even before a crucial conversation is had because people don't know how to have those.
You know, everybody, we need to start listening because I think a lot of relationships could be saved if we do. By the time we have these difficult conversations, we've become difficult, and that's it. Reverend Stephen Thurston, teaching pastor, Salem Baptist Church, the House of Hope. You got to get his book, Mirror Moments, Mirror Moments. I mean, it is a fantastic book. And let's work on ourselves, everybody. One day you just might like what or who you see. Reverend Thurston, I'm sending you much love today. Thank you.
Thank you. You have an amazing day, and your listening audience. Make it the best day of your life.
Amen, amen. Dr. Deborah Holden, brilliant epidemiologist. She is the Associate Dean of Public Health at Michigan State University, giving us some information today. What do you want to talk about? I see your governor's lifted a lot of your restrictions up in Michigan. I mean, we are really opening up. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it happened actually in a day. They announced last week. They had a tentative date, and then the date got pushed back, and they said it's right now, it's today. You know, I told you what it was like for me being in Florida, where most of I don't know if they have any restrictions left, except some stores do require people to be masked, right? So you know, there's no state law, but if you want to go into I won't name the chain, but into one of the big grocery stores or one of the retail shops, they require that people wear masks. But I will tell you, I did see for the most part people having their mask on in the places where the stores required it. But I also saw people in those spaces without them, and nobody said anything.
It's interesting because
So yeah,
okay,
it's getting lifted everywhere.
So
If you recall, Santita, remember 9 weeks ago, Michigan was the hottest spot on the map.
Has that changed?
Remember, our case rates are now down super duper low. Even where I am in Flint, we had 5 cases last week, no deaths. Yeah. So things have changed substantially. We're at about 50% vaccination, but the number creeps along, 0.5%, 1% each week. So, yeah. And then we're in one of these places where the politics of just are wreaking havoc on our ability to do good public health and our ability to get the, sort of economy reignited, because our legislature is a GOP-led legislature. We, almost alternate every, cycle with the political affiliation of the governor. So we have a Democratic governor, GOP-led legislature. Right before her, we had a Republican governor. I mean, it's all over the map. And so people do things and get into this political meddling as a way to sort of mess with their opponent. But it costs us so much. So we have all this money that's been, held up because the legislature couldn't agree on how this money was going to be spent. In the meantime, you got kids, many of whom have not been in school for a year, who were looking forward to going back for summer school. Can you imagine looking forward to summer school? But that's what our kids are doing. Because for many of them, it'll be the first time they've been in school, first time they've been around their friends, first time they've had any semblance of anything that looks like life that they remember and love. And so, so it's just a wonky place, wonky politics right now. But yeah, it is reopened. All of the, no restrictions on indoor gatherings, outdoor gatherings, no more mask mandates, no, none of that. They basically said we're back to business as usual.
Well, back to business.
So,
are we back to health? Look, I hated to cut you off yesterday, but we've got about 2.5 minutes and they belong to you. What do you want us to know as we are walking out into this world where, we've got a new variant? The pandemic is not over. You continue to remind us of that. What do you need for us to do? I think we need reminders.
Yeah, so, I always tell people we flattened the curve in the absence of the vaccine. I do believe that the vaccine is an important piece of the puzzle, but we made tremendous strides without it. People should practice prevention. Wear your mask, wash your hands, watch your distance. Take this opportunity. I tell everybody 3 simple well-being indicators. 1, sleep. Sleep is restorative, it's reparative, it does all kinds of wonderful things for your body. When you deprive your body of sleep, it literally takes a toll on you. It's like nipping away at your health and vitality little by little. So get good sleep. Most people say, how long, Doc? How much sleep do I need? That varies person to person. There's no magic answer, but if you need a magic answer, get at least 6 hours a day. 6 hours. All right, you need sleep. Move your arms and legs 30 minutes every day. You don't have to go to the gym. You can go for a walk. You can do that walking in your home if you need to. But now it's warm outside. People can be outside. If you are going to gather or get with people, remember outdoors is best. I went to a family cookout this weekend. I danced like there was nobody watching. I had the best time. I had to burn up 1,000 calories just dancing, and I loved every minute of it.
Well, you know,
And then that diet, yeah.
No.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm about to go to a wedding out of town
Yeah.
in a couple of weeks. And it's going to be outdoors. And they're spacing the tables apart. Is that safe? 30 seconds.
It's the safest it can be. And if you feel unsafe, you know, here's the thing. I realize there'll be social pressures now around these masks to wear them or not. So bring your mask with you and you size it up. If it feels okay and if it feels right, okay, great. If it doesn't, then pull your mask up. You should be washing your hands and watching your distance anyway. So let's just do that for the rest of our lives.
Hold on, we didn't get here quickly enough, but during the break, I want you to speak to Melissa. She's got a question for you about vaccines. I knew it was going to happen. Knew it.
Okay.
Every day here on the Santita Jackson Show, Dr. Deborah Holden, Associate Dean of Public Health at Michigan State University. You know what it's like, everybody. We'll be talking about ranked choice voting. Do you know what it is? Do you think it's a more democratic way? We'll talk about it in just a minute.
Injustice and neglect, and they will not.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on 820 AM. WCPT Willow Springs is powered by ComEd. If you need help with your bill, call ComEd at 800.
Okay, thank you. Can we bring up Melissa?
Right now?
Right now. She needs to speak before we let Dr. Holden go. She had a question for her.
She's on.
Okay, Melissa?
Hi, Santita.
Hi, sweetie. How you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm doing well, darling. I only have a couple minutes, but I wanted you to have them with Dr. Deborah Holden because you said that you have a question.
I do have a question. I got the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, second dose 3 weeks to the day and time after the first dose. And now it's been over 3 weeks. So from what I understand, I'm in the 95% efficacy zone. So my question is, what does that even mean?
Your question is what, Melissa?
So our question is what?
Melissa?
I'm wondering basically what it means to have 95% efficacy with the vaccine. Like a 95% chance of what?
Okay, so what that number is in the clinical trials, right? The vaccine was found to be 95% effective at preventing people from contracting COVID. What the vaccine is the best at is at preventing people from getting severely ill and preventing people from being hospitalized. Another way to think about it is it has about a 5% fail rate. So about 5% of the time, people who are vaccinated will still end up contracting COVID. But those cases will be a lot milder and highly unlikely to result in hospitalization or death. So 95% in the world of medicine and therapeutics is outstanding. Most therapeutics and most medications that are on the market do not have 95% effectiveness. There's still minor risks that exist. It is possible that you could actually spread COVID without contracting it yourself. Some people will breathe in the virus and breathe it out on another. The virus will never have the chance to replicate in their bodies, but you'll literally breathe it in. It'll be hanging out up in your, mucus cavity in your nose or whatever, and you could breathe it out on somebody else. That's why I tell people, even if you're vaccinated, it's still important to be mindful. And that's a very, very low likelihood, but it is possible. What I envision we're going to see in years to come is we'll see intranasal administration of the vaccine, and those things actually will sanitize the airway so that even if you breathed it in and it was in your airway for a short period of time, it would actually kill the virus, which would prevent you from being able to breathe it in and breathe it out on somebody else. But if you've gotten vaccinated, it is a way to sort of rest easier, if you will.
Melissa, let me ask you this before you go. Oh, no, because, Melissa, would it be helpful if we have Dr. Verholden on for a longer period of time to talk about what happens when you've been vaccinated and how you should behave? Would that be helpful to you, do you think?
Yes. I think I have a good idea, but I'm sure other people.
Okay. You know what, Dr. Verholden? Let's look if we can do that tomorrow, the next day, because now almost 50% of Americans have been vaccinated, but the rules are not quite clear. I've got to come up in about 10 seconds, but I know she feels that she sounds like a broken record, but that's why Melissa called in, and she called in and represents thousands of people who are like, wait a minute, what do I need to do? Because people are not clear.
Yeah.
They're not clear. So
we can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world. I am breathing.
Everybody, welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021. It's a big day in New York City today. 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278 for all of our New York listeners. Those of you in the city, in the 5 boroughs, you're looking for a new mayor today. Now, this is the Democratic primary, which is tantamount to the person who's going to be mayor. If you win the Democratic primary in New York, you become the mayor. Kind of sort of like Chicago. But what's different this time is that they are going to use the ranked choice voting system. Most of us do not know what ranked choice is. Many people are saying that this is a more democratic way. Other people are saying that actually this is a more confusing way. And it gives people a lot of choices, and the choices are ranked. What does that mean? Well, probably the foremost expert on this in America is our guest today. And indeed, he's not a guest. He's part of the family here. He's part of the furniture. Of course, his 2 best-selling books, Rat Effed, Why Your Vote Doesn't Count, and Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Our Democracy. Of course, it's Dave Daly. And you know what? We brought on Reverend Dr. Todd Deary, Esquire, Vice President of Rainbow Push, who's doing a lot of work in the voter registration space to talk about this today. But I need to start with you. You need to set the table for us, David Daly, because now we're seeing, we've seen this in Maine. We've seen this in some places all around the country. But this is New York City. New York City is using ranked choice. And as I talk to my friends who are in New York, because I lived there for many years, and I just don't have talk to someone from New York every day. Everybody's been talking about not just one candidate, right? They're talking about, well, if I put Eric Adams here, let me see who, Maya Wiley. Let me see. I'm gonna do. You understand what I'm saying? And it's been a lot.
I do understand what you're saying. Yeah.
There's been much more debate about who else I should vote for than I've ever heard before.
Right.
So ranked choice voting. What is it? And is it a more democratic way?
Absolutely, I think it is. In an election, ordinarily, we have a single choice, regardless of how many candidates there are. In this race in New York, for example, you have 11 Democratic candidates seeking the nomination for mayor. So it would be entirely possible for someone to win that race with as little as 16, 17% of the vote, right? If it gets scattered widely across 11 candidates. And having such a small percentage of people in a Democratic primary elect the mayor for everybody seems, a little bit unfair. The winner of an election ideally ought to have 50% of the votes. And so what ranked choice voting does is it simulates a series of instant runoffs. If one candidate wins 50% in the first round, they win, same as any other election. But if nobody reaches 50%, the candidate in last place is eliminated, and that candidate's second preferences are redistributed. And this just sort of rinses and repeats until you've got someone who crosses that 50% line. I think it's actually a less confusing way to vote in many ways, and that it gives voters more power, especially when they're facing a ballot with a dozen candidates on it, like people are in New York today. You would be trying to make those calculations anyway, right? Oh, wait a second. I like Maya Wiley the best, but I really don't want Andrew Yang to win, or I really don't want Eric Adams to win, or, so I have to study the polls and try to figure out who's actually in second place. And if I'm voting for my favorite candidate, am I actually helping someone who I don't want to win? Am I spoiling my vote? Am I wasting my vote? And you have to base all this on the polls. And the polls in New York right now are a mess. The only thing they show is that Eric Adams is in first place. Who's in second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth? There's 5 polls. They all have somebody different in all of those spots. So you would be voting blind. You'd be going in and casting your ballot like you're playing a game of pin the tail on the donkey. If you are trying to vote smartly and strategically for or against somebody, and ranked choice voting eliminates all of that. You simply put them in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you're done. And everything else is taken care of for you. It simulates all those instant runoffs, and it gives you a vote in every single one of them.
What happens if no one reaches the 50% threshold? What then?
Somebody will eventually. What happens is the field will narrow down to
have
2.
Another election? If
we do not.
Okay.
What's going to happen in New York is that this field is going to be narrowed from 11 down to 2, and then there will be a final runoff if nobody hits 50 earlier. But all of it happens in one election. So people don't have to come back out to the polls for another runoff, right? We know what that does to voter turnout. It drives it even lower than it usually is in a city election. And we also know who doesn't often turn out to vote in another election. It's communities of color often, because it means taking another day off of work and finding another set of childcare and standing in lines that are almost always way too long. So this breaks it all down into one election. It gives the voter more choice, and it means the voter only has to show up once.
Everybody, we're talking with Dave Daly, the author of Rat Effed and Unrigged. Indeed, he's with Fair Vote. He's one of their fellows. There's no one who is more adept at understanding, explaining, one of the greatest voting and voting rights experts that we have in the country today. And he's talking to us about ranked choice voting. And you need to understand it because it happens in Berkeley, California. It happens in Oakland. It happens in San Francisco. It happens in San Leandro. It is happening in Maine. It is beginning to happen all over the country. Tacoma Park, just outside of D.C. Ranked choice voting is the wave of the future, or is it not? Do you think that people are going to back off of ranked choice voting, or do people like it? Because they've been doing it out in those Northern California cities for a minute, David.
They have. I think when voters get more choice, they tend to enjoy it and to like it. This, as you said, is now the way Maine conducts all of their elections. You had Alaska adopt it last year in their elections, so they will begin moving to it in 2022. You had 4 Democratic primary states in 2020 use it as a means of choosing the winner of the primary there, because they had been caucus states, right? And a caucus requires you to drive all day and stay a long time at an event, and then everybody organizes, and then everybody moves on to a second choice if the favorite choice falls short of winning a delegate. So a ranked choice becomes a much more elegant solution for somebody in Kansas, for example, who ordinarily would have had to have spent that Saturday caucus day all day in, a school auditorium someplace, probably hours from their house. It helps solve the spoiler problem, and it helps give voters additional power when there's a lot of candidates on the ballot. And what we have seen is that both of those are big issues, right? I mean, back in 2016, Republicans had 17 candidates on their primary ballot. Donald Trump only won a plurality. It took Donald Trump until late April or early May to win 50% of a Republican primary vote. And it was only because the field at that point in time was down to next to no one. If you simulated runoffs between Trump and the other candidates in March and April of 2016, he doesn't get the nomination. Trump was a base candidate with about a third of the support inside the party in 2016, and he exploited a plurality system and a large field of candidates and was able to win the nomination as a result. Democrats in 2020 had about 23, 24 candidates at one point in time running for president. You've seen this in your mayor's election in Chicago, crowded fields, low percentage winners. We see it in gerrymandered congressional districts around the country in which the winner is almost always preordained. It's going to be a Democrat or a Republican, whoever drew those lines. And so if there's an open seat, we've had this year in Massachusetts, a dozen candidates might crowd in because that's the only time the seat's going to be open in this primary race. And so somebody has won a congressional seat in Massachusetts here in each of the last two elections with 21% of the vote in an August primary. That is almost none of the actual people. And then if you think back to Florida in 2020, the big primary, the big decisive turning point of the presidential election between George W. Bush and Al Gore and Ralph Nader, 547 votes separate Bush and Gore in an election in which that state tips the Electoral College, except there are about 100,000 people who had voted for Ralph Nader in that election. If they'd had a second choice, probably, some of those voters would have stayed home. It's not as if all 100,000 of them are immediately added on to Gore's tally. Some of those voters might not have a second choice, but I'm going to guess that the majority of those voters, if they were given a second choice, would have voted for Al Gore. And so this is a way that voters can express the fullness of their opinion. You don't have to cast a spoiler vote or a protest vote. Or if you do, you have like an insurance policy. It's a good thing.
That concrete example, Bush v. Gore, because people who voted for Gore or who voted for Nader did not want to vote for Bush. And those who voted for Bush, in all likelihood, didn't want to vote for Gore or for Nader. And you're saying that ranked choice voting could have tipped the scales in that election.
Absolutely would have. In all of these elections in which you've got a Green Party candidate or a Libertarian and people, everyone screams at those candidates on social media the days leading up to the election, you're going to swing the election, you're just casting a spoiler vote. There shouldn't be any such thing.
Well, before I go to Reverend Dr. Yuri, Medi has a question for you. And Medi is, by the way, a lawyer. She said, can a voter pick the same candidate for all choices, like first, second, third, fourth, fifth? How would that work?
You could, but you would be wasting those choices because as long as your first choice candidate is still viable, you are protected. That person, your second, third, fourth choices only come into play if your first choice candidate is knocked out. And so if your first choice candidate is still in and still running, putting them first, you're safe all the way. What a second and third choice does is it gives you a backup if there's someone else you like or someone else you don't like, especially in a big field.
Reverend Dr. Yuri, ranked choice voting, it seems to be the wave of the future. I mean, this is what they do in San Francisco. This is what they do in Berkeley. This is how they vote in Oakland. Just full stop. That's the end of it. What do you think about it?
Well, as they teach you in law school, the answer to a clear question is not yes or no. It depends. And here's here's where it depends. So it depends on the level of education of the voter, right? Typically what happens in high-profile elections is that the behavior of disaffected voters who are not really familiar with the process, it's already very complicated, very cumbersome, is that their focus is on what we would call single shooting. They're going to go in, they're going to focus on the one election and the one candidate that they really kind of relate to or recognize, and that's going to be it. When you start looking at the ranked choice, depending on how many choices you have, then you have to do a better job of educating your electorate around the positions of the different candidates so they know how to rank them. And so really what it does is it has the potential effect of creating efficiency for the more informed, the more aware, and even to some degree, if we started to look at voter demographics, those that are probably more privileged in terms of pieces of the access question when it comes to voting that's already kind of challenging. And so it has a lot of upside potential, but the question for me becomes, what are the blind spots in the process where you might have a good idea that potentially leads to some bad outcomes, particularly for minority or communities of color, poorer communities that don't have the same maybe level of electoral savvy to be able to kind of navigate that process. So it's hopeful in one sense, but it's a cautious one in that we got to make sure that too much of an optimistic good thing doesn't just create a different kind of poison for an already difficult process.
And to your point, David, you see Andrew Yang is campaigning. It's almost like an anybody but Eric Adams campaign, right? And so he's saying he's co-campaigning with another candidate. He said, if you don't vote for me, vote for her. She said, well, I'm not doing any co-endorsing. So that's not what that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, because you can see where this can go right, and you can see where it can go wrong. What is he doing?
Well, what I think often happens, in a race like this, is you see candidates cross-endorse each other. You had this in Maine in a governor's race on the Democratic primary side back in 2018. They actually made ads together, and they said, I want to be your number one vote, but if I can't be your number one, I want to be your number two, and I would like you to vote for this other progressive candidate, number two, if you back me number one. So sometimes you see that this encourages candidates to campaign together and to try and build coalitions. And you're seeing some of that in New York City. I thought perhaps you might see a little bit more with a field this big and robust. But certainly what the idea here is that candidates can't simply coast into office in a crowded field by only relying on their base. And it forces you as a candidate, if you know that you can't win the election with 25% of the vote, it forces you to go out and to find voters who you might not otherwise have talked to or campaigned for, to go into neighborhoods where maybe you wouldn't ordinarily go, because you also need second and third choice votes. And I think that idea of coalition building, of trying to talk to people who you might have otherwise ignored because your strategy was focused on turning out the people who you thought would be hardcore for you, is something that could serve our politics well in this moment in which we don't seem to be talking very well to each other.
Is ranked choice voting kind of like a political convention? Like you go in.
Yeah, I think it could be, right? Except it's not happening in a back room,
I mean, like on the floor.
At a political convention.
You used to be able to, so-and-so doesn't have enough votes for the nomination. And you're right, backroom politics, but you could see the delegates, coalescing. Oh, well, okay, my guy's not going to get to the top, or my girl's not going to get to the top, so let me go with so-and-so.
I'm going to throw in, because, in a presidential nominating process, you've got to have 50% of the delegates to claim the nomination. So there is horse trading going on the floor, right? This puts the people in charge of that kind of a negotiation. It's not happening in back rooms. A future endorsement is not being promised in exchange for an endorsement today, thus taking the people's voice out of a couple of different elections, right? I think one of the terrific things about this is perhaps ordinarily in a race with 11 candidates and multiple Latino color candidates and multiple Black candidates, is at this point in the race, you might have heard calls for some of those candidates to drop out in the past, that they were splintering the Black vote or splintering the progressive vote or the Latino vote. And you don't have that with ranked choice. You can simply go 1, 2, 3 for those candidates. You saw this in Virginia. There was a governor's primary in Virginia on the Democratic side just a couple of weeks ago that was won by Terry McAuliffe. You had 3 Black candidates running against him, 3 very well-established candidates, the lieutenant governor of the state and 2 women, one the president of the Senate and one a very up-and-coming legislator. And there were calls throughout that race for 2 of them to drop out, to await their turn, to get in line. And one of the benefits of building political power in Virginia among the Black community is that there were suddenly, multiple candidates who were ready to step forward and run. But in this single choice system, they kind of all divided the vote instead of being able to kind of pull it together. And the older white Democrat was able to, coast back into office for, likely another 4-year term. This is a great way of building political power that doesn't require a boss in the back room to be twisting the arms of candidates to get out of the race. It puts all that power back with voters where I think it ought to be.
Everybody, ranked choice voting is the wave of the future. It's already happening all around the country. I mean, Todd Urey, Reverend Dr. Urey, you've got your work cut out for you. What do you want people to know as we go in this last minute?
Well, one, you need to have your notebook of what are the relevant issues for you as a voter, and where the entire slate of potential candidates, where they stand on your issues. And this is particularly important. The other piece is that for coalition building, you have to have some collaborative conversations with peer stakeholder groups, particularly if your particular segment of the electorate does not have the ability to kind of determine, you don't have the majority of the overall pool that you represent, but you might be able to swing the outcome of an election. And this is where I think ranked choice voting can have the ability to make sure that those that are typically the minority voters, not just in terms of race, but in terms of demographic, that they might be able to leverage their votes, because while they may not be able to get their first choice, the first choice cannot get a majority of the overall votes on the first ballot. Then you have an opportunity, I think, to be able to swing an election in a way that forces a more robust, broad, issue-focused conversation from the candidates about those things that matter to more than just the narrow interest of the base.
Everybody, I hope you've learned something today, because guess what? David Daly, the author of Unrigged and Rat F. You got to get those books. David Daly, I got 30 seconds. Is this the wave of the future? I mean, it's already, what I see in California, typically I see in the rest of the country eventually. It's already in New
Yeah,
York.
I think you're right. I think today is a big coming out party for ranked choice voting. If this is a huge election, a city of 8 million people, the most diverse city in the world, moving to ranked choice voting, but you are seeing it around the country. In Maine, in Alaska, in California, in Utah. I think a lot of people around the country are realizing that this is a tool that gives voters power that they especially need these days, and that it can do a lot of things to make our elections better. Wow. Imagine that. A reform that makes our elections better.
Wait a minute. Well, that was an accident. Just kidding. Let me not be the cynic. David Daly from Fairvote and author of Unbridge and Ratner. Everybody, please stay tuned. Thank you, Reverend Dr. for this conversation with Phil Wilson. It's Pride Week in Pride Month on WCPT and AM 950 Radio. Let's talk about the Black LGBTQ plus community. Back in just a minute. Thank you, guys. I mean, because it can
really fun.
No. Many people I've seen, my friends in New York are like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, Eric, Ray.
You do have to educate yourself. Yeah, you certainly have to know what you're thinking.
It's been a real education people
have,
and it's
But if there's only one candidate you like, you vote for that the one candidate, and it's no different than the vote you cast in any previous election. This at least a little bit more say. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta kind of figure out what's the rank order of like your vegetables, right?
Exactly.
Kind of like I have my preferred meal, but if I'm going to have vegetables on the plate, I better have an idea of whether I prefer Brussels sprouts or peas. Because if I don't, this is the one real time. The other part of ranked choice voting is.
Hey, Santita, the number for Phil Wilson is not working.
If you don't get it right.
Do you have another one?
Hold on. So, remember, you called me.
Yeah.
I'm old enough for your mom. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay.
Hold on. Wait a minute. Let me get this. Okay. No, you all keep talking. You keep talking. I'm trying to do something else.
So, David, I think we should talk kind of offline and think about what is the voter education strategy.
Yeah.
That if ranked choice voting is going to go live and get used broadly, that we teach basically inform voters how to use the tool of the process to their advantage.
We'd love to be part of that conversation. Fairvote would love to be part of that conversation.
You have to help lead it, because the fact is we've already seen Andrew Yang where this can go, right? And that to me is, when I saw him do that, and he has made a lot of black folks in New York. Man.
No doubt. I don't like the way that Yang has handled himself here. And yet, in some ways, it's not much different than, right? I mean, Buttigieg and Klobuchar dropping out on the
all right, he's on
and endorsing Biden, right? So he could have just dropped out and endorsed her, I guess, if that was what he wanted to do. But it's I don't like that in the middle of a race in which there's been early voting going on for the last 2 weeks. So then suddenly all those people who voted for Yang have their votes not count.
All you need to do. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see an unfair process for anyone.
Exactly.
I'm for fairness, but you don't need to come out and say, don't vote for him, vote for me.
Yeah.
I'm like, Andrew Yang, come on now.
Come on, dude. I think people see through. I imagine people will see through that. I mean, but
I just, what, it's going to be interesting to see, because San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, Alaska, Maine, da da da. It's happening, everybody. And so we need to understand how people are voting, how our voting choices are changing. In the midst of, as our rights are being, diminished.
And then it could conceivably change the nature of the race, right? I mean, the person who is ahead after the first round might not win.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, this is like,
if more people who support the other candidates in later rounds get behind the other candidate, you could see a situation where somebody who had been leading after the first round or the second round is not ahead at the end because they're not able to get over that 50% mark, and someone else is. Now that suggests that candidate would have lost in a runoff head-to-head against the other candidate. But under the old plurality system, the race might have ended after one round.
Well, we're going to see it. Yeah. I think when we come back, I've got to welcome Phil Wilson to the show. Indeed, someone for whom I have so much respect. He's the founder of the Black AIDS Institute. I've known him a long, long time. And he's been he's been in leadership in the Black and in the human rights community for more than 30 years. And plus, he's a South Sider from Chicago. What? Whoop,
all right.
Yes, here he is. Phil Wilson, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning. How are you doing, Santita?
Well, I am doing well. You're listening to, I want to introduce you to as they leave. That's David Daly, New York Times bestselling author, Rat Effed, Why Your Vote Doesn't Count, and Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Our Democracies from Fair Vote. And we've got Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary. He's the pastor of the Douglas Memorial Community Church out of Baltimore. In fact, that was Raphael Warnock's pulpit before he moved down to Ebenezer, and he's the vice president of PUSH now. And he's Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary, Esquire. So, Phil Wilson, consider yourself connected to David Daly and Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary.
Well, it's my pleasure. And thank you for having me on your show this morning.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you for coming. It's out in California, you guys. It's early, but thank you for loving me, Phil. I said, please don't hate me.
Look, he's up early and he sounds like he's awake. I want to know how he does it. That's just impressive.
I mean, he said, okay, no, I'll do it. I said, really? Will you? Thank you. But oh, bless his heart. But I'm so glad. I'm so glad that he's here because, this is what we are doing on the Santita Jackson Show. What happened to my other paper? But thank you, Reverend Dr. Yeary, and thank you, David Daly. Thank you all so much. And I'm going to go on and
good to do it.
Get together for this upcoming segment, you guys.
Have a good rest of the show. Talk to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, Phil, I'm looking for a paper that I just had. This is unbelievable. This happens to me like constantly. I'm looking for this. What did I put it off to the side? What did I just do? That's not it.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. Yes, we can change the world. We can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love. It's not too late. Gotta save the children. We can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. It is June 21st, 2020. Happy summertime, everybody. You ready for it? I sure am, and I'm so glad that it's here. Everybody call me or text me at WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, or AM 950 radio in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I want you to call me or text me at 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. We've got a lot to talk about today as we are in the midst of Pride Month, and this is Pride Week on WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station. And Pride Week in the midst of Pride Month, yeah, so we're putting an exclamation point on Pride, where we are looking at LGBTQ issues and celebrating that part of the American family and the world family. And I'm so excited today to have with us someone who's really been a pioneer in that space, particularly for African Americans. Phil Wilson, the founder of the Black AIDS Institute. We're going to be speaking with him in just a minute, but I'm going to get you a couple of headlines in before we get to Phil Wilson and John Nichols at the bottom of the hour as we talk with him about all of this dark money in politics. Everybody, after weeks of warnings of growing dangers about the coronavirus variants, the Delta variant may be responsible for a six-fold increase in hospitalizations in one Missouri city alone, everybody. A hospital CEO in Springfield, Missouri said most new patients there are unvaccinated and appear not to have observed basic pandemic precautions. So to be fair, everybody, a lot of my friends are vaccinated aren't observing those precautions either. Health experts worry more about local spikes like this, that they feel that they could be on the horizon. We're about 2 weeks away from the Biden administration's self-imposed July 4th deadline to reach a 70% partial vaccination rate among U.S. adults. When we get there, we will see. The NCAA, wow, they took a hit yesterday. The Supreme Court unanimously handed down a huge ruling saying student athletes can receive education-related payments, everybody. This case could reshape college sports by allowing money from a billion-dollar industry to go to the players in a concurring opinion. Justice Brett Kavanaugh said the NCAA, quote, is essentially acting above the law, close quote, in how it treats athletes and forbidding them from making money off their college fame. This ruling is the first time in decades the Supreme Court has considered the issue, and it is an enormous win for a class of students who say they are being exploited as their coaches make millions of dollars, as the assistant coaches make millions and certainly hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, as their schools make hundreds of millions of dollars, and the NCAA pulls together billions of dollars. Wow, everybody, big, big, big. The lawmakers in Washington are set to resume tense negotiations today over voting rights, infrastructure, and police reform during an important week for President Biden's legislative goals. President Biden met privately yesterday with two moderate Democrats, Senators Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who are crucial players in the push for his $4 trillion economic agenda. New York City is now the largest U.S. jurisdiction, largest U.S. city to implement ranked choice voting as the city's primary elections get underway today. Under this system, voters rate their top 5 choices in order of preference instead of picking just one. A change that allows the city to avoid separate runoff elections and crowded mayoral primaries, which no one is expected to reach the 50% threshold tonight. Sad news. Over 30,000 U.S. veterans of post-9/11 wars have killed themselves since 2011, according to the Brown University Cost of War Project, established in 2010 to account for the loss of lives and taxpayer dollars spent on the U.S. wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. An estimated 30,177 veterans and service members have killed themselves over the last nearly 2 decades, compared with 7,057 members of the military who have been killed in combat. Everybody got to talk about that. And we are finding that the UN is saying that we are facing the worst cascade of human rights setbacks in our lifetimes. And she particularly pointed out the troubles in Myanmar, Belarus, Ethiopia, and China, and Russia. Wow. Let's look at that. And 94% of Americans, 94% of Americans in the United States, we do not want pharmaceutical corporations to control the global supply of COVID-19 vaccines. Wow. Lending support to international demands for achieving universal access to inoculation through more knowledge sharing, technology transfer, and public production of doses. Indeed, many nations around the world are seeking to have the intellectual properties shared so that they can produce the vaccines in their own countries. They don't have to wait for them to be transported. And something historic happened yesterday. Las Vegas Raiders player Carl Nassib became the first active NFL player in history to come out as gay on Monday. Everybody let's talk about pride. What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? Why do we need it? And when you see pride and when you see the representations of pride, you really don't see a lot of African Americans. Even though you do have a lot of African Americans who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. So let's talk about this with indeed one of the pioneers in this space, someone who's helped us to humanize and really diversify the face of pride, the face of the LGBTQ plus community. Phil Wilson, he's a trustee of AMFAR, but he is the founder of the Black AIDS Institute. And we have been working together for, oh my goodness, I don't know how many years, more than 30. And have always admired him. He has really shown a light in some dark places as we have been really pushing to help people to understand that African Americans, that you exist in the space, particularly when we had a president at the time, Phil Wilson, President Ronald Reagan, who would not even mention the name of AIDS. I don't think he did that until 1986, more than 5 years into his presidency at the height of the epidemic. Welcome to the show, Phil Wilson.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's always good to talk to you, even if it's early in the morning.
I mean, it's real early. But, he's out in California. Don't be fooled, everybody. I had to save this the best for right here. He is a South Sider, okay? He is from Chicago. Come on, whoop, whoop, hands in the air. We just love you, Phil Wilson. Talk to me about what is pride and where do Black people fit in pride? Because when I see the faces of pride, when I see the celebrations, I don't really see a lot of Black people and brown people in it.
Well, thank you for that question. Pride actually is the celebration of the equality of LGBTQ. And for some of your listeners, we should break down that acronym: lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and questioning individuals, otherwise known as the gay community or sexual minorities. It's basically a statement about equality in our society, in the United States and, quite frankly, now across the world, and the fight to make that happen.
Has it been difficult to have your voice heard? Do you think that Blacks in the LGBTQ plus space feel heard?
I think that certainly it is difficult for Black folks to feel heard. The issue of intersectionality comes up. And when I think about the Black LGBTQ community, I think about a quote concerning the liberation movements of the 60s and the struggles of Black women. And there's a quote, I think it's Barbara Smith, who said that all of the women are white and all of the Blacks are male, but some of us are brave. And so to be, a Black queer person, Black sexual minority, a Black LGBTI person, it really is about the intersectionality and living in an intersectional world. You raised the issue around, quite frankly, the lack of visibility or the invisibility. Some people even say the erasure of Black queer folks in the queer space. But I want to point out, the erasure of queer folks in the Black space. That there are queer leaders in Black communities, and there are Black leaders in queer communities. And so the role, I think, of Black LGBTQ communities is, quite frankly, to shine the spotlight on the liberation of all of us. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "A threat to justice anywhere, is a threat to justice everywhere. And none of us can be free until all of us are free." And so the fight that marginalized folks have in any and all these struggles is not just a fight for our liberation, but quite frankly, it's a fight for everybody's liberation. Because, Santita, if you think about it, if you really think about it, and I want your listeners to kind of wrap this around the brain, is that whenever there is a part of our community now that is being alienated, marginalized, othered. We all know, no matter who you are, there's a part of you that you know is othered as well. And when you see that happening to the person sitting next to you or the person across the street or what have you, you feel the danger that presents to you. You may not admit it, you may not acknowledge it. Sometimes you may not even realize it, but that threat is a threat to you as well. And so that is kind of the role that I believe Black LGBTQI folks play in Black spaces as well as in gay spaces.
Michelle Williams has an interesting point. She's over here on my Facebook page. She said, I am an ally because I have friends and family affected by AIDS. LGBTQI are people, but they are Black first. What do you think about that?
I don't know if identity works that way. I certainly would agree with Michelle in kind of an external reaction. And the thing about the world is that in all sorts of ways, people choose how they see you, but that may not be consistent with who you are, if you will. And we're getting an education in that, particularly in the part of the LGBTQI community that is the trans community. That whole debate on who is a woman, for example. And just because you see me in one way doesn't mean that that's actually who I am. Another example of that, particularly in the United States, is that when you see someone who is dark skinned, you assume that person has lived the Black American experience. And you walk up to them and you begin to speak to them in English. But what happens if they're from Côte d'Ivoire, or they're from West Africa and they speak French, or they're from Brazil, and they speak Portuguese? You think that they are one thing and yet they are another. And so I absolutely agree that, at this point in my life, as an, old Black gay man, that when I walk down the street, when I encounter a police officer, when I have all sorts of external relationships, the first impression that someone has is that I am a Black man, but my identity cannot be compartmentalized if I seek to be a healthy person, and so I take the entirety of myself with me as I walk into the room. As Pat Barker said, if I could go someplace and take all of me into a room, if I could go to a Black poetry reading and not leave my queer self behind because half the poets are homophobic, or if I can go to a queer poetry reading space and not leave my Blackness behind because most of the poets won't understand, then I will call that a revolution. And I think that part of what we're seeking in the kind of the experience of the human experience is that kind of revolution where we respect that people know who they are, and we should believe them when they tell us who they are.
What is the preference in terms of how the community is addressed? I mean, Michelle responded. She wanted to know what the letters LGBTQI, SGL, what they mean. And I heard you just use the term queer. Some of my friends in the communities are offended by that. I hear a lot of different things. How does a straight person navigate the space so that you're respectful and so that you can understand more about?
Well, that is such a great question. And, I'm 65 years old, and I'm actually going to pick on your dad for a minute, and on the Black experience. Now, I had a good friend of mine, she's gone now, but her name is Ruth Waters, and she said that, I was born colored, I was a Negro, I was black and I am now African American. But as you know, for a long period of time, black identity had the nomenclature for black identity has changed. Now, your father put forth an analysis that suggested that African Americans was appropriate, just as people from Germany or Poland or other parts of Europe could claim their ethnic background in their American identity. Why couldn't Black Americans or African Americans claim our cultural, historical, ethnic background as well? And so I think that the issue in the LGBTQ community is about individuals choosing, taking ownership of their own identity. So to answer your listener's question, LGBTQ is about lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and questioning or queer individuals. So that is what the acronym stands for. Lesbian are the way that women identify their same-sex attraction. Gay is often the way men, but also some women identify that way. Bisexuals are people who are attracted to both men and women. Questioning are people who are exploring their sexuality. Queer, I think that many of your friends who may be offended are older people. Younger people are tending to steer towards queer from two spaces. One is to take the power away from queer when it is used in a derogatory way. Historically, now in a historical way, queer was a insult, and so a way to take the power, the sting away from that word was to claim it. A lot of people use the word queer because it is an inclusive word, that it brings the community together. It doesn't segment the community in ways some of the other words are used.
How do we pull things together? I mean, because we are living in a time in which everything's on the table, Phil Wilson. We're talking with Phil Wilson, who founded the Black AIDS Institute. He's a trustee of AMFAR. And we're living in a pandemic. We're living in a time of economic insecurity. We just keep on going. I mean, you got the president trying to get an infrastructure bill that has child care in it and take care. I mean, and we still have a crisis of AIDS and HIV, in the world. I mean, it's shockingly, COVID-19 is not even the number one killer in the United States. How are we how do we braid all of these issues together? Because I've always seen you as an intersectional leader. I mean, you don't leave any part of you behind. How do we pull all of this together? I mean, how do straight people approach Pride Month and Pride Week? What can we all do to come together?
Well, I'm going to start back, as you know, that I see myself in an intersectional way, but I see myself as a human being, and I see myself as a civil rights activist and as well, and probably primarily as a civil rights activist. I see my AIDS work, I see my queer activism all in the lens of civil rights. From the school of Martin Luther King's quote about none of us are free, or to all of us are free. Now, I'm an environmentalist because queer people live on this planet too. And so I actually want to answer your question by looking at the issue that you raised. I know you didn't expect to go down this tangent, but the infrastructure bill. So childcare, of course, is in the infrastructure bill because it is a modern day infrastructure bill. Infrastructure, in its most narrow definition, is the work that you do to get people back to work, to expand commerce. That's what infrastructure is. And yes, you need highways, you need bridges, you need railways, you need broadband to get people back to work. But you also need childcare to get people back to work. You need broader access to education to get people back to work, to expand the economy and commerce. So all of it is infrastructure. infrastructure. It's not the addition of these things that make that to infrastructure. Childcare is not an addition to infrastructure. Childcare is infrastructure. Expanding education is not an addition to infrastructure. It is infrastructure. And I wish the Democrats would stop taking the bait that what they're doing is adding things to quote unquote infrastructure. Maybe highways, bridges, and rail, is the universe of infrastructure if you are white and wealthy, but for the rest of us, if the goal is to get us back to work, the definition of infrastructure is broader than some people want it to be. So I want to start there. And then that brings us to the...
Hold on, no, because I want you to be able to finish your statement on the other side of the break. I'm bringing John Nichols on, but I don't want to cut you off. Because one of the things that you're hearing with Phil Wilson, the founder of the Black AIDS Institute, trustee of AMCAR, member of the Rainbow Push Coalition, and civil rights leader, and that's why I talk about intersectionality, is this. The LGBTQI, SGL community, they're part of the human family. And everybody's got the same concerns. So the same kind of passion you hear about what you think are issues specific to them, what you're hearing from Phil, is how people think. Because we're all breathing the same air. We all have to cross the same bridge that might break. Back in just a minute. Santita Jackson Show. I didn't want to cut you off. I don't want to give you 30 seconds. I wanted you to time out because I think it's important, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. And actually, what your transition is actually where I was going, so it'll be perfect and I can be quick.
Oh no! It's just I knew that's where you were going. That's why I was going to help a brother out.
Yeah.
Well, because that's how I met you. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't see people in these little boxes and baskets because voting for Reverend Jackson was like you had a target on your back. So it was like, wait a minute, I don't care what you do, who you are. As a matter of fact, I do care because I love you. Beyond that, guess what, honey, we're all in the same boat. People think we're all crazy. So I mean, let's stop. So that's why I wanted you to be able to finish saying what you were saying, and I want it to be appropriate. I didn't want to rush it. Really don't. I
appreciate that.
No. Oh, come on. This is me. I wouldn't invite you on here. And okay, that's it. I'm wrapping it up. I'm done. I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't. But thank you for being here. I know it's early.
Mr. Nichols here.
Okay. But John Nichols from The Nation. John Nichols?
I do.
Oh, John Nichols. This is Phil Wilson from out in California. Well,
great.
Yes. He's finishing up his statement. It's Pride Week in the midst of Pride Month here at the station here in Chicago. And
yes,
I wanted to bring Phil Wilson on because, we were just talking about these issues, and with Phil Wilson you can. So why don't you talk amongst yourselves while I'm pulling something else.
John, how are you doing?
I'm very, very well, my friend. Where are you at out in California?
I'm in Los Angeles. So yeah, and
it's early there, my friend.
It is early. I want to thank you. The nation has done a very good job of covering the HIV/AIDS issue, and I appreciate that. And your publication has always been there to keep us focused on that issue, and I'm grateful for that role.
Well, it's awful kind of you to say, and it takes what we do is cover a lot of activists to do the hard work, and so it's good to have the people out there doing the work. I will tell you that, and still doing the work. That's the important thing. It's unfortunately this is one of those things that people lose sight of, and especially in a lot of our media, and so you gotta kind of be even louder nowadays.
Yeah. As my grandmother used to say, you don't leave the fence until the fence is painted. No, not just while I'm watching.
Oh,
that is very true.
did he bring my great
Yeah.
grandmama Tibby up for me? Oh my gosh, that sounded just like her. Oh my gosh, with that she had a cigarette dangling from her lips, though, I must say.
Well,
But
undoubtedly, that led to her authority, but did her no good physically.
honey, by the time she sent you in the backyard to get that switch, and if it came back
Yeah.
too short, she'd take you back out there to get the big one. Oh my gosh, I never got that
She
because
was.
I didn't want it. Oh.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, everybody. Hey. Oh, Deborah, I wish you would call back. Bless your heart. She was going to speak about being queer. Deborah, call back. We got John Nichols. We're going to be talking about all of this corporate money that's in politics. But, Phil Wilson got him up real early. He's out in L.A., and he is the founder of the AIDS Institute, Black AIDS Institute, and he's a trustee of AMFAR. Member of the Rainbow Push Coalition, and so many organizations. I met him as we shared in the civil rights space. And, I have to say, when Reverend was running for president, people, said, I've never heard anyone talk, let the word gay come out of their mouths, particularly as a candidate. But that's, this is, the point is, we're all part of the same community, everybody. And so, Phil, you were making the point about that, about why there's intersectionality, why everybody ought to be concerned about everybody else's issues, because you were so impassioned about infrastructure.
Absolutely. And I think that, as you said before the break, that we are all a part of, a family, and that's the human family, and we all are in this together. Your question was, how do we come to unity? And that's about understanding that. I remember reading about the cloth of oppression. And the threads of the cloth of oppression are woven throughout the cloth. And you can't cut out the part of the cloth that offends you and call yourself just. You can't cut out the racism part and wrap yourself in that cloth. You can't cut out the homophobia part and wrap yourself in the cloth, because the threads are woven through. And so that if you want to fight racism, you have to fight homophobia. If you want to fight homophobia, you have to fight sexism, and xenophobia, and you have to fight for the environment, because at the end of the day, love and justice is an expansive concept. It's not a restrictive concept.
Anything else you want to say, Phil Wilson? I got to get you back on the show.
Well, I want to defer to John. I don't want him mad at me.
You'd never be. I'd never be mad at you.
The nation has been supportive of our fight around HIV and AIDS for a long time, and I'm really, really interested in hearing what John has to say about this dark money. Our democracy is under assault. And our only defense is to basically know what the enemy is doing. So I appreciate you for letting me share with you a little this morning, and I'm going to be listening to what John has to say when I'm off the air.
Sending you much love. Can't wait to have you back, albeit early in the morning.
Absolutely.
Phil Wilson, everybody, give the Black AIDS Institute your support. It's our institute, because indeed it saves lives. Alex, corporate funders are complicit in state-based assaults on voting rights and democracy. Now, we're hearing that Joe Manchin is listening to the Koch brothers, and they are helping to guideth his steps on voting rights and on his votes. They're the ones who are giving him the pushback. And then there was a conversation, John Nichols, national correspondent for The Nation magazine, that was leaked, in which he said, look, you all have to give me some help here. I got these wolves at the door. These people who want progress. What? Help Help me. I mean, of course, I'm not really dramatizing it because you don't have you don't have Democrats at this point elected in the state of West Virginia. He's the one.
Yeah.
And but I think we need to understand why a lot of these people vote the way that they do. These elected officials elected by you who vote against your interests. There are some other things going on in the background. I think we need to look at the money. What is ALEC? Who are ALEC? What is going on here? Because voting rights, that's something that they're really trying to deal with it in Washington at the White House today, literally today.
Oh yeah. Well, let's go big picture, and then we'll focus in on ALEC. And thanks for having me, as always. But the big picture is we're talking a lot about what's happening in Washington, and we're talking a lot about Joe Manchin. Well, the one thing I always point out as regards Joe Manchin is that, yes, he comes from West Virginia, a state that, other than Joe Manchin, elects mostly Republicans to statewide offices, and Republicans have a dominant position in the legislature, et cetera, things of that nature. But I will just point out that right across the border from West Virginia is the state of Ohio. In Ohio, Republicans hold all the major statewide offices except one. They dominate the legislature. They dominate the congressional delegation. Trump won Ohio by a wide margin in 2 elections. Trump won West Virginia by a wide margin. And yet, in Ohio, Senator Sherrod Brown, the one Democrat holding statewide office, is a passionate supporter of campaign finance reform, of voting rights, of ethics in government, of a host of progressive positions. And so you need to understand that Manchin could be better, right? I mean, he has made the choice to be who he is. And so you ask yourself, well, why do some of these politicians, Democratic politicians included, make the choice to be who they are? And the answer to that question has an awful lot to do with the behind-the-scenes influence of money in politics and the behind-the-scenes influence of organizations that seek to influence politics at the state level. Joe Manchin came up in the state politics of West Virginia. In West Virginia, as well as a number of other states, the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, is a very influential force as regards the legislature. ALEC was created almost 50 years ago by very conservative interests, including folks associated with the Koch brothers back then. And what ALEC does, very quietly, is pull together the better part of 2,000, I emphasize that number, 2,000 state legislators from across the country, states across the country, almost all of them very conservative, almost all of them Republican. And it gives them so-called model legislation. And that model legislation usually involves deregulation of business, making it easier for corporations to make money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So corporations fund it, ALEC. They put a lot of money into it. All the big corporations do, and of course, entities like Koch Industries, et cetera. Well, ALEC about 10 years ago, a little under 10 years ago, got in a lot of trouble because it was learned that ALEC leaders were pushing these so-called stand your ground laws that allowed you to, shoot somebody or gave, exactly. And that was right where it rose to a high level. It happened. A lot of us were talking about ALEC back then, and ALEC felt the pressure because they've been working on anti-voting rights stuff. They've been working on things like stand your ground. They backed out of all that. They said officially, we're not doing that anymore. And so people were like, okay, well, this is progress. This is an organization deciding not to push on those fronts. It would keep to its very corporate stuff, but it wouldn't go over into the election stuff. Well, in recent months, the Center for Media and Democracy and other groups have exposed that ALEC and many of its leaders, many of its leading members, have been very, very involved in all of these assaults on voting rights across the country. Sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, often very much behind the scenes. But what we see is this corporate-funded entity back in the game, back there, pulling together all these legislators And so you ask yourself, why do all these laws keep turning up? Why do we have more than 400 proposals to assault voting rights? Why do they keep having the same language? Why do they keep going in the same direction, which is an assault on democracy? Well, there's a group called Heritage Action. It's very, very active. But we now learn that ALEC has also been, associated with all this. And so the other day, 300 of the leading voting rights and civil rights groups across the country called on all corporations that are funding ALEC to stop doing so, to end their association with this entity, because many corporations come out publicly and they've got all their positive ads and they say how, we're for diversity and we're for, helping everybody out and that. But then behind the scenes, they're funding an assault on democracy itself. So Public Citizen, let's see who else, Color of Change, and a host of other groups have stepped up and said, look, this has got to end. Common Cause has said it. All sorts of groups are saying, these corporations have got to stop funding this, because we've started to see where the real behind-the-scenes push is coming to undermine voting rights.
But even the big unions, right?
What's that?
Even the big unions.
No, the unions are not associated with ALEC.
No, I'm saying I thought AFL-CIO was
oh, yes, I apologize.
No, that's quite all right.
So wise. Yeah, you're right.
No,
yes.
because, this has been a real big fight, but ALEC is not something that is really top of mind for most voters. I mean, we really, really, John, have to learn how to follow the money. And we have to understand that advocacy happens. These people are advocating themselves in different guises all day, every day. That's why you need to support your civil rights organizations and all of these rights organizations, because when you get to Washington, D.C., this is when you see ALEC. This is when you see all of these corporations. Stop talking about the lobbyists. The corporations lobby for themselves, and they set up organizations that go on that hill, that go to Washington. They go to the White House, and they apply the pressure, and they apply it at our state houses, and they apply it at the city halls. Is that not right, John?
I think that's about right, but let me offer one little subtlety of it. These corporate interests are so powerful, and they and their CEOs and all their associates and all their political action committees have so much money that a lot of politicians don't even have to be lobbied. They don't have to be told what to do. They just know. And so as a result, you have this sort of long-term reality where politicians are trained to fear the dark money, are trained to respond to it. It's almost Pavlovian. And Manchin is a classic example of that. He's somebody who has for decades been awash in all sorts of special interest money and very much accepting it. And it's just interesting to me that in covering this over many, many years, what I have learned is that you don't have to, it's not like somebody has to pick up a phone and tell a conservative politician to oppose voting rights. They get it. They get that if we have strong voting rights laws in this country, if we really protect the right to vote, and if we have strong ethics laws that, rein in lobbyists, if we have strong campaign finance laws that make for a fair and level playing field, if we have strong protections against gerrymandering, if we put in all of these protections, right, if we really do what ought to be done to maintain a strong and healthy democracy, a lot of our conservative friends aren't going to win. And it's not that they're going to be playing in a fair fight, and in a fair fight, people are more likely than not going to choose what is in the interest of the great mass of people, not, a narrow segment of very, very wealthy, very powerful people. So that's why so much of this is behind the scenes. That's why it's so underreported. And frankly, that's why I wrote about it the other day, because I think this is one of those issues that people really need to be conscious of. And again, you said something really important there, Santita, when you said support your civil rights organizations, support your voting rights organizations. This is vital. Groups like Black Votes Matter and Black Voters Matter. This is really important because they're in the front lines here. They are fighting at the state and local level, and it is a really hard fight because organized money is very, very powerful. It has tremendous influence. The only way to counter that is with organized people. And yes, we've got a lot more people, but we do have to organize them, and that costs a little bit of money as well.
And you have to stay vigilant. I mean, because the fact is these organizations and so many others that we've not been able to mention, they are your lobbyists. That's my point. Dr. King was a lobbyist. He was an advocate. Reverend Jackson is an advocate.
And so
he's a lobbyist. These people are
every day.
lobbyists. The big six were lobbyists. They would go and lobby for you, me. That's what they do. And you have got to fund them because I don't think that we really have any idea how much money corporate America, the corporate world, puts into these organizations, puts into an ALEC.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is the interesting thing, Cynthia. You're so right because, you know, I always kind of let's just take a quick, you know, kind of worldview. Talk about Jeff Bezos, right? You know, from Amazon.
You mean the one who everybody they signed a petition to keep him out in space? That one?
Yeah, leave him there. Well, he's only going to be there a few minutes, but he thinks it's going to change his life. But yeah, this guy's so rich he can jet off to space for a few minutes. But you know, look at the money that he has. It's, you know, you're now dealing in the hundreds of billions of dollars, right? Well, if you're dealing in the hundreds of billions of dollars, to spend $1 million is it's not even something you're going to note, right? It's a tiny expenditure. And yet, in our politics, $1 million can have influence. 10 million can have a huge influence. 100 million, you know, can begin to be definitional. $1 billion, well, that's now you're getting into the level that candidates for president spend to get elected president, and not just the candidate themselves, but all the groups associated with them and stuff like that. Well, you know, Jeff Bezos, you know, he can spend $1 billion, and it isn't going to change his life at all. It's not going to harm him at all. And that's true of an awfully lot of other very, very wealthy, very, very powerful individuals. And so they can put money into an ALEC. They can put money into a special interest group. They can put money into a lobbying group. They can put money into dark money. They can put money into direct contributions to campaigns. And at the end of a year, when they've written all these checks, they don't even notice it, right? And yet, their influence is huge. And so here's the deal. We have made the price of entry into our politics for the very, very rich and the very, very connected extremely low. You know, pocket change, they can influence our politics. Unfortunately, the price of entry for the great mass of working Americans into politics is relatively high, right? I mean, you and I are not going to be able to write a check sufficient to influence politics in, you know, all 50 states and influence the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. But if we coalesce with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of other progressive people and give our little bit or raise our voice, sign our petition, that's how we have our influence.
That's right. It's Occupy Washington, Occupy Wall Street. Look, President Obama, when he first got into office, said to the Wall Street CEOs, or whatever corporate titans he was speaking to, but he was speaking to some corporate titans, and he said, look, you guys, I'm the only person standing in between you and these pitchforks. These people are angry with you. Let us not forget, everybody thinks this tumult started with President Trump. That is not true. He's a response to it just as President Obama was. I'm not making equivalence there. What I'm saying, though, the electorate reacted by electing a black man president. They expected things to be very, very different because of the black experience. The electorate reacted again by looking at a socialist a social Democrat, because that's really what Bernie Sanders is. He's really in the FDR tradition. And Trump, everybody toggle between the two. If we'd had ranked choice voting, only heaven knows what would have happened in 2016. Okay? So now what you're looking at is you have a very, very electric electorate, if you will, John. People have no money. But it's true, they have no money. They feel like they have no options, and increasingly that is so. People leaving these jobs, they're like, you know what, I'm not going to make money here. You know what, I'll depend upon myself. That's what I'm going to do. So what I'm saying, what I'm asking you is, I'm trying to make this point. I do believe that even without we have marching feet. When people show up at these offices, when they show up at the White House and stay there, when you can't get through the streets of D.C. Look, Million Man March in Washington. John, there was a day of absence in D.C. You couldn't find anybody. Certainly no one white. They just moved, shut their doors, got out. When people show up and threaten to show out, the powerful respond, John. You and I know that.
Of course. And this is simple logic. Again, it goes back to that thing we just said a moment ago. The only way to counter organized money is with organized people. And this is something that Dr. King recognized a long time ago. It's something A. Philip Randolph recognized even before Dr. King. And it's something Frederick Douglass recognized even before A. Philip Randolph. I mean, we go through this list of individuals, and what we start to recognize is that progressive forces have a history and a tradition. Our history and our tradition is of trying to use the ballot box where we are able to do so. But when the ballot box is blocked, when our road into power is, faces barriers, faces, difficulties, then we go to the street, right? And we organize mass marches, and the history is epic. Think about it. We remember the Million Man March. We remember the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. We remember the great marches because they are as much a part of our history as the great election. And once we put those pieces together, then you understand that it is possible. It's possible to counter Alec. It's possible to counter, Mitch McConnell. It's possible to counter all these folks. But if we lose sight of that fact, if we forget this sort of dual responsibility, never forget to vote, never forget to march, then power knows how to, because power is always, it's always in action. It's always looking to consolidate its authority. Power knows that that's its opening to make a move. And what's happening right now across the country is that power is making its move. And, the mistake that we make is to think that all of these assaults on voting rights are simply the product of Donald Trump or simply the product of some conservative legislators around the country. Wrong. They are pulled together by behind the scenes, very well-connected organizations that, get those legislators the model legislation, give them the prodding, connect them with the right people, put them in the right positions, and, frankly, make sure that the money flows, especially at election time. And so this is when we sort of peel the curtains, pull the curtains back, we see the inner workings of the thing. And once we see the inner workings of the thing, we know what our job is.
And what is
our job is to counter that.
In the last 2 minutes,
to counter that.
How do we counter
that?
Do we get registered to vote? Do we march? What do we do?
Well, you know the answer to that better than I, and it's all of the above, right? Of course we register to vote. Of course we participate in elections. Today is election day in New York City. There are, incredible races out there, and it's vital to go and vote in those elections. We're going to have lots of off-year elections all across the country. We've got to vote in all of them. We can't just vote in presidential elections. That's step one, because so much about our lives is influenced at the local and state level. Step two is to, not just to vote, but to support the candidates who we believe can be transformational. You and I know that you don't even have to win necessarily to run a transformational campaign, as Reverend Jesse Jackson did in 1984 and 1988. But then once we're done with that electoral politics side, then there has to be the activist side, and that is to support the organizations that are there 24/7, the vigilant organizations, so many of them, and we know their names at ACP, Color of Change, Public Citizen, Common Cause. The list goes on and on, the labor or movement. And we give support to that. And then when these organizations call us to the streets and say it's time to march, we go march. You check all those boxes, and we've got a good chance.
That's it, everybody. We can change the world. And you need to be vigilant, because guess what? You really do matter. Your vote matters. John, last 30 seconds. Help people to understand just how much they matter. Each individual. And if we come together, boy, we can change the world.
I could give you the easiest example ever. If you look across the country in the 5 states that really shifted the presidential election, you add up the votes that shifted it. You're not getting too many more votes than you'd fit in a soccer stadium or a big football stadium. And so presidential elections are decided at the highest level of power in the world, often by a handful of people. So we matter. And if we show up, we can change the world.
Keep our eyes peeled for what's happening in New York today. Ranked choice voting, away from the future. Better understand it. And know that you matter. I love everybody. God bless you. See you tomorrow. John, I got about a couple of minutes before I jump into the Zoom call. Thank you, Jewel. Thank you, Richard. Do you want to? Is there anything else that you'd like to say? Is there anything that was left unsaid?
Well, I think we covered it pretty well. I'm glad that we made mention of the New York race today, and I know that you've got folks who tune in via the internet from New York, and I wish you were on air in New York today because it could be really helpful, because I fear that turnout in New York City won't be that high, and that's a really unsettling reality because if it was a high turnout, I have little doubt what the result would be. But with a low turnout, a relatively low turnout, we'll see what it is. I hope I'm wrong. But with a relatively low turnout, it becomes very possible that the result will not be necessarily a progressive result. We'll see what happens. But what's interesting in New York is there are so many races in play. You've got mayor, what's called the public advocate. It's the number 2 job. You've got the city comptroller. You have 50 members of the city council being chosen. You have borough presidents, which are essentially mayors of each section of the city, so lower level officials. And then you have district attorneys, including the Manhattan district attorney, one of the most powerful in the country. So this is a huge day electorally. And on this day, I think back to David Dinkins, 1989, and that transformational primary in 1989. David Dinkins beat Ed Koch in the primary, beat the sitting mayor in the primary, and then went on to beat Rudy Giuliani in that November election. And what an incredible moment that was.
It was an incredible moment, but it was also a nod to organizing. See, we had won the primary in New York in 1988, and that coalition from the Jackson campaign stayed together in 1988. I remember the night that Reverend Jackson lost the state but won the city overwhelmingly. He said, we might not have gotten the state, but we're coming back for the mayor's office in just a year's time.
Absolutely.
And that is what happened.
And you know what they did? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go, please.
No, I was just going to say, you're exactly right. And you know what they did? They tried to turn that against David Dinkins. They said, oh, he's too close to the Reverend Jackson. And
you know what else he did? He was not the best campaigner. Now I love.
No, I know.
No. Because what ended up saving his campaign, sadly, was Yusuf Hawkins' death. Because he was being too careful.
Tragedy.
He was being too careful. The thing is, you don't run away from the people who brought you there, because he and Percy Sutton And Basil Patterson, the eventual governor's father, who was the first black secretary of the Commonwealth, well, the state of New York, right? So you have Basil Patterson,
Secretary of State,
you have Basil Patterson, Charlie Rangel, Dave Dinkins, and the king of that group, Percy Sutton, also known as the chairman.
Yeah. And
Sutton,
Denny Farrell up in Harlem, and all these folks.
They were like the big four in Harlem, though, right? And Denny Farrell was, was in the state assembly. All of that. I mean, you had these people, and the thing is, with all of the organizing that was done, John, the thing is, you can't run away. That's your base. You got to keep them excited.
That's right.
Be very clear. That's the only way you're gonna get in. You're not gonna get in with anybody.
Remember Al Van?
Look, all of them. But I'm just saying, these are people who
Al Van over in Brooklyn, all these folks. Yeah.
The first time the black community got organized, according to my New Yorker friends, was under the Jackson campaigns, because unlike in other cities around the country, the black community in New York is heavily immigrant. So people don't identify as Black American first. Like, I'm Jamaican. I'm from the Dominican Republic. I'm from here. I'm West Indian. It's all of that. Nothing wrong with it, but it's splintered the community. The first time you had that community come together was in '84 and absolutely in '88. Absolutely in '84 too. And so that gave Dave Dinkins the basic that 10 years hence, that Percy Sutton wasn't able to pull together. And Percy Sutton had been the most scandal-free Manhattan borough president in the history of the city. Okay. So
he ran for mayor in '77, and only got about 10% of the vote. Couldn't even pull, all of his potential base together. And you're absolutely right.
It took that campaign, the rainbow that pulled all these folks together, that pulled that coalition together, and that's what happened. And so, unfortunately, Mayor Dinkins, and I'll just say it, he started trying to move away from that because people frighten him about the people. You got to dance with the one who brung you, sweetie. That's the way it works. And he didn't mean any harm because he was trying to win. But the thing is, the best you could be was Manhattan Borough President, which is nothing. That's no small thing. But you needed something bigger. And the folks, and after you win the primary, after you win the city of New York, after Ed Koch and all these people came after Reverend Hard, and he won it anyway.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh! Wait. So going against that, because he just started doing all kinds of things that were like, oh my gosh, what is he? He's going to lose this thing. Because I just moved to New York at that time. I was like, I can't believe it. He's going to lose this. I mean, it was like I was calling.
Well, it was close.
I was calling my dad all the time. I was like, can you get up here? I mean, I think he's about to. You couldn't believe it, because coming out of the New York Democratic primary that night in 1988, everybody said, we're going to come back and we're going to take Ed Koch out. That's what we're going to do. That was the promise. And everybody was excited about that. And that's, so I'm just saying, everybody, this is stuff, I need to write a memoir about all these little political lessons I've learned. How about that? Because you
could do a very fine one. Yeah.
I know. I mean, because I've just seen a lot, and it's like, wait a minute. Number one, don't run away from your base. Don't ever do that. These are the people who. This is the bed you sleep on.
Well, and who really understood that? Who recognized that, and who recognizes that is the right. The right's actually quite good at, conservative Republicans are very good at taking care of their base, at keeping conscious of it. And the frustrating reality is that Democrats aren't always as good at that. They don't always focus on it.
And from the jaws of victory every time. No, because they're busy trying to be corporatists when they should be populists. Their base is a populist base, but they have corporatist aspirations. They're never going to win. That's why they lost everything with the presidency in 2020.
But can I just throw in, because I know you've got this Zoom to do and we've all got things to do today, but apropos of our opening conversation just in the last half hour, we were talking about intersectionality. And one of the things that's really important to remember is that when Reverend Jackson came to New York in '84, which was, when the AIDS crisis was starting to really take hold, and especially even more so in '88, he reached out to the LGBTQ community. And people like Andy Hum, if you remember Andy Hum, became, very, very vital, necessary backers of that Jackson campaign. So you had this multiracial coalition.
They had a desk. This was the first time a presidential campaign gave the LGBTQ plus community a desk.
That's right.
The Arab community had a desk. The LGBTQ community, women had a desk. Black women, white women had a desk. All women had a desk. Black women, white women organized. That was. Let's be clear. He was the first presidential candidate, to put LGBTQ plus rights at the center of his campaign. Right?
All right. Totally. Yeah. And much of that coalition held going into that 89 campaign. And so it was that intersectional coalition that was brought together that made it possible for David Dinkins to be elected mayor. And, Dinkins was not a perfect mayor, but he was a fine mayor compared to a lot of what we've had since in New York City. And so I just, well, I'm still looking for that person. I think you're closest I've met so far. I'm not
a mayor. Are you kidding me? I wouldn't do it. But
I know you're wise. It's a hard job. But I will point out that Maya Wiley is running. She's got a lot of progressive support. She's really made a major effort to organize Black women and to organize a multiracial coalition. And AOC is backing her, so are a number of other key folks. She's not the only progressive in the race, but she looks to be the one who's, kind of come to a leading position in the race for comptroller. Brad Lander, who is just an incredible progressive, just a superb organizer and activist, an urban planner, running with great ideas. In the public advocate race, Jumaane Williams is the incumbent, very likely to be reelected. He looks to be in a strong position. He's supporting both Lander and Maya Wiley. And then in the race for Manhattan DA, the guy named Bragg, B-R-A-G-G, who would be the first Black Manhattan DA, also is the most experienced candidate, even backed by the New York Times. But unfortunately, it circles us around to all the issues we're talking about. He is a brilliant prosecutor, a brilliant lawyer who's got a lot of vision, but he's not super rich. He has an opponent. Pause for a second. He has an opponent who spent something like $8 million of her own money in just this primary for Manhattan DA. So we see this super qualified African-American candidate facing a tough race against someone who does not have his level of qualifications, but has a lot more money. And so that kind of dots all the I's and crosses all the T's.
If the colors were reversed, if it were a Black person spending $8 million, while you had a white person who, like a Dennis Kucinich type. Look, honey, I am tired of this. The system is not right, because you've got Black oligarchs too, or who want to be. So everybody, you know what? Let's stop. Either you want to end slavery or you don't. Either you want to be in the big house or you want in that plantation system. Now, we're all trapped on it. Black, white, brown, yellow, and red. It's got to stop. This is not working. It's not going to work. It's already coming apart at the seams. So, I'm going to see, one of the problems that you're going to see is that the media raided Eric Adams' apartment. That has
Yeah, I saw that.
Oh,
yeah.
That has infuriated the Black community. I just want you to know that. So that is
and understandably so.
Oh yeah, and so that is where if that has kept him at the top, albeit by 24% of this field's 11 or 12. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's about a dozen.
We'll see. It's unbelievable. We will see how this all works out. I cannot wait until tomorrow morning. If they know anything.
Oh, yeah, my friend. I'm going to send you love and solidarity, but with also a frightening message. I'm afraid it probably won't be tomorrow morning. I'm looking at how this that New York Board of Elections. It is the slowest in the country. Literally, they win the race. They are the slowest in the country, and I counsel people. You may by tomorrow morning have the first choice votes in this ranked choice voting thing, but there's a very good chance that it's going to take a couple weeks. I'm going to emphasize that word weeks before we clearly know who won, especially if it's a close race.
And you know what? That works for me. Take the time, make the time. Let's make it work. I mean, I don't have a problem.
Exactly. Get it right. Get it right.
I mean,
exactly right.
I don't mind.
Yeah.
Let's just see, and let's see how this works out. But ranked choice voting, everybody pay attention to it. They're doing it in Alaska, Maine, San Francisco, Berkeley. It's happening all around the country, and it's coming to a city, a town, a state near you. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. We need to understand it. That's why you need to look at New York today. John Nichols, is there anything else you want to say before I run to the Zoom call that I'm late for? Thank you.
No, what I'm going to say is run to that Zoom call and make it on time. Thanks for having me.
Well, I told him. I said I'll be off by 5 after. But with John, I'm never off by 5
Well,
because I love talking to John.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the great work that you do. You know I love you, and you know I love this history.
Well, I love you. It's always good just going back over the stuff because that's why we have to write it down because we need to know exactly what happened and how the stuff happened.
Yeah.
We'll see what's going to happen in New York. I cannot wait to. That's my
we will.
That's my second home, so I am very interested. My phone has blown up this morning already with my friends calling me. Oh yeah. It's a race. So everybody, I love you. Dave Dowling, my brother to the north up in Canada. Richard Marks, how you doing? And let me see. Linda, Vicky, is it Kareem? Bab, how you doing, sweetie? And so I love you, love you, love you, everybody. Nina, my girl, love you, love you, love you, love you all, love you all, love you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, Jewel. And everybody here, all of my morning stars, go out and make it a great day, everybody. I love you so much. Bye-bye. Love you, John.